discussing, there's more, is how do we even get tracked? And so part of it is understanding what the process even looks like. So usually it goes like this. Somebody brings up a topic, either their thoughts, their feelings, plans, their concerns, and how you react or respond to it is the key. Joe, what's the difference between a reaction and a response?
So a reaction is a little bit more visceral, a bit more immediate. Mm-hmm. Not a whole lot of thought goes into a reaction. It's coming from your gut, maybe subconscious. Whereas a response is a little bit more thought out. Mm-hmm. You're taking your time to consider all the factors in the equation.
So when I break down what kind of reactions and response you can have obviously the response would be very loving, kind, caring, thoughtful, thought out. A reaction can make you incredibly defensive. Mm-hmm. It can make you dismissive or withdraw. And it can also cause people to be abusive. Now, when we think about the reaction patterns, you got to pause and ask, where do some of these reaction patterns even originate or come from? One of the areas is trauma. And when I mean trauma, most people think war scenes or rapes. That definitely can be the trauma. We call those big T's, big traumas. We also have what we call little traumas. And so I tell people this is like death by 1,000 cuts. Growing up in a yelling and screaming household, one time of yelling and screaming is not going to hurt anybody. It's like a little paper cut. But if you continuously are exposed to that over time, it's like death by 1,000 cuts. They've actually done MRI studies of a kid who was raised in a war zone, a physical war zone, and a kid who was raised in a yelling and screaming household, and they found that their brain MRIs look the same. And so if you do deal with a lot of little traumas, you've got to be able to recognize where is my reaction pattern coming from. Another one is lack of communication skills. One of the things I tell people, I'm like, skills are something to be learned and acquired. So when you say, I don't have any communication skills, I'm like, great, fantastic, you're capable of learning, so let's learn, And so, and again, if you were raised in a yelling and screaming household or a household where, your parents watched TV all day or played video games or were drunks or alcoholics or did drugs or workaholics, you're not going to be exposed to a whole lot of communication. So how do you know how to talk and communicate in your relationship if you were never taught? Next one is lack of personal awareness. And this is, again, one of the things of really paying attention to yourself. And what I mean by personal awareness is just being mindful of how do you act and how do you engage in the people around you and how do they react to you, and just being mindful of that. And the last one is unhealed and unmet needs. And we're going to park out on this one for a hot second. So this is what I call in my hole in the heart theory as to where a lot of unhealed and unmet needs can come in at. So at the beginning of life, who is responsible for meeting our physical, mental, and emotional needs? Parents. Okay. Are parents perfect? No. I don't believe in parent bashing. I believe that the majority of parents are very well intending. We have 3 kids. There's not a single day in my life that I woke up and thought, which one of my kids can I ruin today? But unfortunately, there have been times where you're having a bad day, you're sleep deprived, you're stressed out, and you end up hurting your kids' feelings. And so what happens is we put little dings in our kid's heart. Case in point, I was going to the gym one time, and my son, who's almost 14 now, he was probably about 4 at the time. He's sitting there in the back seat telling me about his little Minecraft world. He named it his lovely little world. And And I'm sitting here like driving along, going, yeah, cool. I know so much nothingness about Minecraft. Like, I don't even know how to ask this kid questions. You know, I'm like, I don't even know how to engage him in a conversation because I don't even understand the game. He's tried to explain it to me. I still don't get it. And so I'm sitting here and go, cool. Why are we kicking goats in this game? You know, his sister breaks in and says, Mom, look at that dog. And I literally go, yeah, cool dog, just to answer her. Mind you, he's still talking. He's been talking for 20 minutes, you know. And he breaks down and he goes, you don't love me. You don't care about me. You always interrupt me. And all I could think about was, ding. I put a ding in his heart. Didn't mean to. I didn't wake up that morning and think, oh, this is what I'm going to do to my son today, you know. And so when you get a ding in your heart, that ding can grow and fester over time into a bigger and bigger hole if to the perception of the kid, it feels like it's constantly reinforced. Now, if there's any sexual, physical, mental, or emotional abuse, you're going to have some pretty big gaping wounds. What do people do or use to fix these holes? Addictions. What else? Drugs. Yeah. We get, sex, drugs, alcohol, money, status, power, food, chocolate's in its own category, shopping, pornography, sports. This list can go on and on and on. Is some of this stuff good? Sure. Some of it bad? Yeah. What makes it all bad in this context? Yeah. What you're really doing is instead of turning to God, these are what I call our modern day idols. Instead of turning to God to fix those holes, we're turning to a substance, we're turning to food, we're turning to things, or we're turning to relationships. And this is where marriage comes in at. Unbeknownst to most people, everybody started marriage with some kind of a hole in their heart. They started marriage with feelings of feeling rejected, feeling abandoned, not good enough, not feeling loved, not feeling cared for, some kind of hurt that has creeped its way into the past. And it's the easiest way the devil can muck us up. Let's just start something in childhood, sit back, let it grow and fester. I'm good. And then it just keeps going until somebody says stop. And that's what you're here today, is to examine yourself, to go, this is enough. I've got to know what is hurting so bad in me that it's time to stop, because this is how it interacts in marriage. So let's say she's got the feelings of, I'm not good enough, and he feels like I'm not a priority. You know, he's been gone at work all day. She's been home with the kids all day. You know, she cooked dinner, and he sits down on the couch and goes, come snuggle with me. And you're looking at him going, I would love to, but I've got to clean up the dishes, and the kids still need a bath. And he's just like, no, come snuggle with me. And she's like, no, I can't. And then he sits back, gets an attitude, starts mumbling, blah, 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 blah. Because what happened was she poked his hole. You know, he doesn't realize that he's got this hole, you know, and it could come from my parents were divorced and I got tossed back and forth throughout the years, and I didn't really feel connected to either one of them, and they always seemed to put their needs above mine. And he just wants somebody to just pay attention to him in that moment. You know, and so he doesn't realize that whoosh, in that moment of her saying, no, I got to do this, it triggered his wound. And so in that moment, he throws back an attitude, which then hurts her feelings because she came from a yelling and screaming household. And all of a sudden, she's feeling like, man, I can't do it good enough. I stay at home all day with the kids. I try to clean. I try to cook. I try to do this. I try to make your life easier. And I'm not good enough. So then what does she say? She says something sarcastic back. That pushes him away even further. And this is how woundedness in the marriage keeps you trapped in the cycle. Very common cycles. And as soon as you guys can start identifying some of these holes, it changes the game. I remember one time, Joe said something to me. I don't even know the nature of the argument. This is probably about 5 or 6 years ago. Honestly, don't even remember the nature of the argument. I just remember what I said. It hit me, and I mean, it felt like, from my toes up and whatnot. And I literally looked at him, and as calmly as I could say, I said, we need to stop this conversation right now. I just got the whoosh, and I go, and if this continues, it will not end well. And I go, I need to go figure out of why what you said is bothering me so bad. Being the smart man he is, he threw his hands up, goes, take all the time you need. He turned around and walked away, And so it took me a couple hours to figure out why what he said, which logically I knew shouldn't have bothered me, but why did it bother me? And once I was able to figure out what hole and what wound it touched in me in that moment, we had a very productive and healthy conversation about it. I can't imagine what the conversation would have looked like had we not, And so when we're doing and trapped in these cycles, I kind of broke the cycles down into a couple different categories. We've got traps and cycles that feel controlling. The goal of marriage is to create a trusting, loving, kind, caring place that feels safe for both people to come and engage in. And so unfortunately, some of the traps that we can create can have a sense of feeling controlled and have a sense of feeling isolated. So under the control is the silent treatment and the withdrawal. Joe, why is the silent treatment controlling?
It gives my mind is blank right now, I'm not going to lie.
Sorry, we didn't practice that. I know. It's controlling because the conversation, you cannot move on in the relationship until the person who starts speaking. So whoever is silent controls that entire conversation, controls the entire relationship until they decide to start speaking again. And so it's this insidious, just kind of twiddling your thumbs, waiting for the other person to re-engage, Yeah. Now, place of rejection, what I mean by this is, the best way I could describe this is through a Bible story, is when Jesus commissioned the disciples, he told them to go out into the world and preach the good news. And he said, if you go to a town and they receive you there, great, stay. He said, but if they don't want you there, what did he tell them to do?
Shake the dust off your feet as a testimony against them.
Yeah, and move on.
Move on.
And so what I tell people, I'm like, what you're supposed to do is go ask one time, hey, do you need help in this, or do you want to hear this, or do you want this? If they say no, obligation done. Move on. What a lot of people end up doing is putting themselves in a place of rejection. Oh, no, come on, let me help, or no, let's just talk about it. And they keep pushing, and they keep pushing, and they keep pushing, until this person blows up and gets mad. And now they're hurt because their intention is, I just wanted to help, but you didn't respect the boundary. And it's controlling because you're not allowing that person to have any freedom or any say in the timing of certain things. If they're saying, I don't want to talk right now, and you keep pushing, and then they blow up, well, the blow up and the pushing, both of those are controlling. Mm-hmm. Passive aggressive. Basically, a passive aggressive person is somebody who does not know how to deal well with negative feelings. And so they indirectly express their feelings in typically very negative ways. So it could be through procrastination, not following through with something, your typical slamming cabinet doors, or doing a poor job on something just because I really don't want to be doing this, but I got to look like I'm doing this, Aggressive, abusive. Again, control takes away power from a person and their ability to make their own decisions. In a aggressive and abusive relationship, this is one of the least things that most pastors talk about. Is looking at the statistics today, and 66% of pastors admitted to never talking about abuse in marriage, never discussing it. And unfortunately, when 25 to 30% of marriages do deal with some form of abuse, physical, mental, emotional, or sexual, and the statistic is the same in the church as well as outside the church, that's a problem. That is a big problem when not enough people are talking about it. And again, figuring out for the person who is the abuser, what's going on that you feel like you have to power up and control another person.
Where's that wound coming from?
Where's that wound coming from? Because when that wound gets poked, hey, the defenses go up. I get it. You want to protect it. It's just like if you've got a broken arm or stitches on your arm, you're going to do everything to protect it from somebody bumping into it. You don't want anybody touching it. And so if somebody gets near, you're going to be like, hey, and might give them a little shove and be like, get out of here. Don't want you to hurt me. And so figuring out where is that wound. And if you are in an abusive relationship, there is help. I'm not saying it has to automatically end in divorce. Absolutely not. Our goal is to save marriages, to redeem marriages, and to restore marriages. I am saying you can get the help you need and not have to deal with the struggle. Codependency and addictions. I put them in both categories for a reason. Codependence, most people don't understand what codependency is and is not. Most codependents are naturally loving, naturally caring, very giving individuals. They're naturally giving individuals who don't know how to say no and who have no concept of boundaries. And so this is one reason why they match very well with addicts, because addicts like to bust through all the no's and get what they want, And so codependents can be controlling because they try to control all the players in order to have the ideal outcome, and they end up taking away people's power and decision-making power, and it can feel to other people around them like they're a control freak. When really they're just trying to keep things balanced, juggled, and try to make the best for everybody in the situation. Now, addictions, and again, some addictions are more isolating, some addictions are more controlling. If you have a gambling addiction, a lot more controlling because it controls the finances, And we go to Waterstone Church, and they did a huge demographic study of what are some of the issues going on in the area. And one of the number one things that popped up in the area of marriage was gambling addiction. Yeah, I was shocked. I was like, really? Over pornography? And she's like, yes, over pornography. So even pornography can be controlling because it can control somebody thinking, oh, I need to be a certain way in order to prevent you from fill in the blank. And again, alcohol can be controlling. You can't go anywhere or do anything or take the person to places if you feel like they're going to misbehave, get sloppy drunk, or they're not going to behave themselves. So, any questions before we move on? Text them, 7900.
970.
Okay, there we go. So, and again, guys, I know this is a lot of information to throw at you, and Joe will join me in a minute. He's got a lot of stuff to say about the next talk, too. There's just a lot of teaching components to this one. So, traps and cycles that isolate. Again, the goal in a marriage is to build trust and have a sense of safety. And so when we're getting stuck in these heart wounds and these common arguments and, here we go again, the same roller coaster, here are the ones that trap and isolate. The pursue and withdraw. You often see it as somebody's like, oh no, let's talk about the problem, and the other person wants to withdraw. And you got to realize the person who actually withdraws has this idea of, I want to try to preserve the marriage. They usually don't want to rock the boat, and so they withdraw because in their mind, I'm actually doing the marriage a favor by not engaging. And what it feels to the other person is that you just left me alone and you don't care. And so this is where I would tell somebody in this situation, engage. Like, I know there's a fear of what if it gets worse. Sometimes it will get worse before it gets better. I actually told a client that the other day. I said, think about Jesus. I'm like, it got worse before it got better. He had to die before he was glorified, and sometimes in healing your marriage, it will get worse before it gets better, and that's okay. Weaponized incompetence. So this doesn't necessarily have to mean it's intentional. Sometimes it can be if you use weaponized incompetence with intention, shame on you. But usually it's just this idea that I'm going to do something so poorly that you're never going to ask me again. And the person then feels like, well, I have to do it all by myself and I can't rely on you and I can't trust you. And it erodes trust, And so I'll give you an example.
Oh, we don't need to see that.
Yes, we do. So, I'm not going to name any names, but this is how somebody made the bed once upon a time when I asked. And now this is how they make the bed now. I might have or I might not have sent this to my mother-in-law and complained to her. But that would be a good example of a weaponized incompetence of, again, may not have a skill level, may not know, they may not know the standard of care that you want to live up to, but they either on purpose or not on purpose do something so poorly that you can't trust and depend on them. Next is what I call ostrich syndrome. It is what it sounds like. Stick my head in the sand, let me ignore the kids' behavior. Let me ignore their noise. Let me ignore the mess. Let me just ignore everything. And they're so nonchalant that you're like, do you even have a pulse or a thought? And again, you got to realize that this is frustrating to the person who wants the engagement because it makes one partner feel completely isolated and like you don't care. And the goal is to create a bond and a connection which builds trust and safety, not a disconnection. Decision fatigue and mental load. Best way I could describe this is, and this is how most women's brains work, we're like a computer with 15 tabs open at one time, and every tab has a different amount of energy attached to it. And so when we're focused on this one tab over here and somebody interrupts us, we have to mentally move our energy to go and open up this tab, answer this question, and then move energy back to figure out, where was I on this list of things? And when that happens 50 million times throughout the day and it keeps bringing the energy level down, you are done making decisions by the end of the day. Because not only did I decide which socks my kids are going to be wearing, what shoes they're going to be wearing, and then help decide the fit that they have and which sippy cup they wanted. Now I have to find the ketchup, for my husband and his keys and this and that and make this decision and then stop and tell somebody what time it is. And it's just all these little decisions that have to get made throughout the day. And then if a lot of the bigger decisions, the kids' schooling, where you guys are going on vacation, who's planning the vacation, fall on the same person, one person's done. That's what decision fatigue and mental load is this idea that I have every decision, the majority of the decisions to make, and I am mentally exhausted with the load of making them.
Yeah, and that one could be dangerous too because you've got it's so covert. The appearance of niceness, wherever you want to go, I don't mind. Let's do whatever you want to do. But in reality, that's all that's doing is just continuing to put the decisions on the other person. So it has the appearance of wanting to be selfless sometimes, and sometimes that is the intent. But the byproduct of not having a decisiveness to it, it yields this decision fatigue.
Absolutely.
Even if you didn't mean to. That's part of what pours into that.
Absolutely. I tell couples, I'm like, you didn't get married to be alone. You didn't get married to do life alone. You didn't get married to have a roommate. You didn't get married to have somebody just split the bills with you and split the chores with you. You got married because you want a deeper connection. And how do we create that deeper connection? And again, sometimes our own wounds get in the way of the deeper connection. And so you've really got to do a self-examination and think about how are my wounds playing into some of these traps and what trap and cycle are we caught up in? Again, another one that isolates is not following through. If you keep asking one of your, your partner in the marriage of, hey, can you do this? And they're like, yeah. And they say yes, and it doesn't get done. And then you ask them, hey, can you do this? Yeah. And it doesn't get done. And after a while, you're going to start realizing, like, I can't trust you to help. I can't trust you to be here for me, even in the small stuff. And so this is where it starts eroding some of the bigger things. If I can't trust you in the small stuff, how am I going to trust you in the bigger things? And again, codependency and addictions that typically isolate in this realm can be pornography. It can definitely is gaming, if you have a gaming addiction, and being a workaholic. You know, you got to understand that, again, I talked about how all traps and cycles create a mistrust in the marriage, and the goal is to create a bond more than just a roommate status. You don't want to be just roommates. You want to have a bond that loves and cares for each other. So, getting out of common traps and cycles in your marriage. So, the Book of Boaz, would you like to discuss the story? Just bring everybody up to par on the story.
Right. So, everyone who's, heard the Bible story knows that Naomi and Ruth come back to Israel after their husbands have passed away, and they go to work in the field of Boaz, or at least
Ruth does.
Mm-hmm. At Naomi's direction. And Boaz, knowing what his property looks like, knowing his business, knowing who he is, and knowing how his field ought to look and who ought to be working there.
And how many people are there?
Yep. He's on top of his stuff. He notices a new girl and starts paying attention to her.
Correct. And so this is where we're going to pick up. When we talk about this, I know it just talks about Boaz and what he did. I want you guys to understand this isn't just directed at the guys. I want women to pay attention. This applies to you too. And so this isn't just a, hey guys, pay attention to what Boaz did, and pointing fingers at you. No, ladies, pay attention to what Boaz did. You got a lot to learn from his character as well. So one of the things he first did was he knew who he was, and he understood his status. And it's like, do you understand who you are? Do you understand your wounding? Do you understand your strengths? Do you understand your weaknesses? And do you understand your role and the importance of your role in your family and in your life and in your marriage? Because the more you have an understanding of yourself and a healing of yourself, and again, being marriage-minded up here, the more you understand how that affects the marriage, the better your marriage is going to be. Number 2. He noticed and took interest in her. When's the last time, wives, you took an interest in what your husband is doing? When's the last time you noticed he was tired? When's the last time that you noticed he just needed some physical affection and just went up and gave it to him without asking? Husbands, when's the last time you noticed that your wife's exhausted, or that she's dead on her feet and she needs some time away from the kids, or she needs a vacation away from her job? Like, how often do you actually notice the needs of your spouse? And this is what I like about this story, is the interest he took in her and noticing who she was and zoning in on her. And then continuing the story, he zoned in on a lot of what she needed. And so do you really understand what your spouse needs? Because how do we get out of the traps and cycles? Well, we start focusing on healing ourselves. Number 1, know who you are and understand your status. And then start taking an interest in your spouse. So part of this is also knowing some of their woundings. Are you responsible for healing your spouse? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. That's God's job. Your job is to basically understand it, hold the space, and be purposeful about not trying to poke at it. So for instance, I remember going to Joe one time early on in our marriage, and I said, hey, we need to sit and talk. And I go, I can promise you what we're going to talk about is going to make you feel like you're not good enough. But I'm telling you right now, that's not my intention. You know? And I brought it up from the beginning, and I had to speak to it because I didn't want him to feel that way. But knowing some of the wounding he deals with, I had to speak to his wounding first in order to have a conversation, because I didn't want the conversation to go sideways.
Mm-hmm. Very helpful.
Yeah. Yeah. Number 3, he offered her praise. How often do we affirm what our spouse is doing, even the small stuff? You know, and I get it. You could be so angry, resentful, bitter. It could be years of misbehavior. But if you're going to start healing your marriage one little step at a time, you got to learn to find the good in what your spouse did and start praising them. And if you're having a hard time doing it, and I'm not going to sit here and tell you it's easy, okay? It's probably one of the areas I struggle with the most, you know, just being full honest, you know. But you're going to have to figure out and work through with God of going, what is my hang up and my issue about praising them? You know, one of the things one of my old pastor's wife would say is the triple P's: publicly and privately praise your partner. Find a way to publicly praise them in front of others, and find a way to privately praise them individually. Any thoughts?
No, for someone whose love language is words of affirmation, that just can go a long way of filling their love tank up.
Mm-hmm. If you don't know what he's talking about, I really encourage you to go to the number 5, lovelanguages.com. Really good information to understand how to hit the bullseye of filling up your spouse's love tank and loving them in a way that is most meaningful to them. They have a quiz on there to help discover what your love languages are. Number 4, Boaz communicated his intentions. And this is super important in marriage. You know, again, communicate your intentions. If I didn't go to Joe and say, hey, I'm not intending to hurt you, but I have a feeling this is probably going to poke at X, Y, and Z, that conversation, I can guarantee you, would have gone sideways real quick. Mm-hmm. Real quick, you know. Yeah. And so you've got to, number 1, not assume what your spouse is intending. If you're feeling hurt by something they said, ask. You know, if you feel something, say something. You know. And
I think we oftentimes think that our spouses are professional mind readers, and they're not. It's not fair to think, oh, you should have known. You should have known that I was thinking this when I did this, and you know. You get yourself into a lot of trouble assuming that your spouse should have known. Right.
And this is where I think a lot of defensiveness comes up at too. When somebody thinks you should have known, and then somebody's walls go up of defense, we're going to talk heavily a lot about, as the time goes on, about defensiveness in a marriage, because it can absolutely ruin a marriage when you just start logically trying to defend your position versus hitting what emotionally was said.
Yeah. But also in the context of the Ruth and Boaz story, this communication of intentions was a really great sign of leadership on his part. It offered her a tremendous amount of safety and comfort. You know, we're going to talk about that too, but like, just the fact that he was straight with her from the beginning of, here, I want you to do this. You're going to come here every day. I've already ordered my men to stay, you know, do this and that. He had all of that laid out for her, and I can only imagine the breath of relief that she probably sighed from having all of that spelled out for her and it's just spoken out loud.
Well, field after this, and I'll have to keep hunting fields, and I'll have to worry about my safety, and I don't have to worry about not eating, and I don't have to worry about this, and I don't have to worry about that. But he created that sense of safety in her by speaking his intentions and speaking the expectations.
Yeah.
You know, and so How often in your marriage do you speak your intentions and speak your expectations so it's very clear?
And I think it was really, kind of romantic too a little bit. He told his workers to drop a little extra grain for her,
Yeah, give her a little something, something.
Yeah, it's like,
give her a gift.
yeah, but it's just like, hey, even before they, got together officially, he's making sure that
caring for her.
Yeah, he's doing his due diligence to make sure that she's got a little extra, throwing a little something more her way. Not just the bare essentials, going out of my way to make sure that I do something a little bit more for you.
Right, absolutely. And again, by doing these things, he was offering her consistency. And I think this is one of the most underrated marital skills is consistency. Do you consistently show up in a way that brings trust and goodness and love to your marriage? Can your spouse consistently depend on you? Even from little things like getting the kids to and from school on time, getting certain things done around the house, being able to make requests and knowing that they care enough to consistently show up and do it. Like, who's heard of Pavlov and his dogs and ringing the bell, and they would drool every time the bell would ring and whatnot. So they found that the best way to really mess them up and make them drool every single time was to be inconsistent with the bell ringing. If they ring the bell every third time, they would literally drool every third time. If it was every 15th time, they would pick up the pattern, drool every 15th time. What would mess them up the most would be 1 time here, 3 times there, 15 times, 12 times, 10 times, 12 times, 10 times, 3 times, 2 times, and just kept skipping all the way around. They didn't know what to do, so they would drool every single time regardless. And so needing that consistency of knowing what to expect builds trust. It builds peace into your marriage. And it lets your partner know that, hey, I love you enough to pay attention to even the small details. And again, he offered her comfort of, like what Joe said, of just giving her a little extra, the comfort of water, the comfort of shelter, the comfort of protection, and he offered her protection. I can't imagine being a woman back in that day knowing you needed a guy's protection, and he gave it to her. But also, women, how do you protect your marriage? How do you protect your spouse? And it's in little ways of even just how you talk to your friends about him. How you meet his needs and protect some of his time and make sure that his time is just as important as your time and your time is just as important as his time. How are you protecting those factors in your marriage? Anything you want to say? All right. So that is the first part of the traps and cycles. And again, the traps and cycles can cause mistrust in the marriage, and the goal is to build trust, safety, and security. And so when you hear the story of Boaz, I want you guys to sit here and ask yourselves, which areas of my life do I need to do better in? And I don't want you to get overwhelmed thinking, oh my gosh, I need to do all of them. Pick one. Okay, we just started the month of March. Well, yeah, we're still at the beginning. Started the month of March. Pick one of these that you need to work on. Dedicate to working on it through the month of March. Next month, pick one more. Keep the March one and an April one. Work on one thing at a time. The next month, pick another one. Keep March, keep April, start a new one on May. By the end of the year, if you guys even worked and changed 6 things in your life, how different would your life be? And so sometimes people get too overwhelmed at the thought of, oh my gosh, I've got so much work to do. And it's just like, yeah, we all have a lot of work to do. All of us. But you don't have to do it all at once. As long as you just start, there's grace for the journey. So thank you very much for listening to this. And we look forward to this Sexpectations talk. So what are we doing now? We just go right into it. We're not going to take a break.
It's 5 whole minutes.
Yes. Okay. Hi, guys. Welcome back from the break. Super excited to talk about sex tonight. This is one of those taboo things that church people don't talk enough about. And so I know for some of you this may be a little bit uncomfortable, and I'm not going to apologize for that because there's a whole book in the Bible about sex. So I kind of think it's important to God if he decided to put a whole entire book in the Bible, you know. And so as we talk about this, we're going to just dive right into a common scripture. And sorry, this thing won't stay up. Let me see. Get that there. Okay. We're going to just jump into one of the common scriptures that people have and talk about in regards to sex, but more importantly, we're going to give a background of what was Paul's understanding being a Jewish man. What would he know about sex, and what were Jews taught about sex? The more I dove into this, the more I was fascinated. I was just like, why are we not doing this? You know? So we'll just jump right into the most common verse most people know.
Yep. And
can you see it?
Yeah, so we'll just read along together. 1 Corinthians 7, 3 through 5. This is the go-to verse for people to talk about, the roles of, husband and wife in the sex. The husband should fulfill his marital duty to his wife, and likewise the wife to her husband. The wife does not have authority over her own body, but yields it to her husband. In the same way, the husband doesn't have authority over his own body, but yields it to his wife. Do not deprive each other, except perhaps by mutual consent and for a time, so that you may devote yourselves to prayer.
So you're going to have to understand the culture at the time was very male-dominated, and women were viewed as property. And so for him to come and say that, husbands, you don't have authority over your own body, was huge, because it put the husband and wife on a playing equal field, on equal grounding. And so that right there is a dramatic, dynamic shift of the culture at the time that this was written. And here's where part of his understanding would come from. In the Torah, the word used for sex between a husband and wife comes from the root delit av tav, meaning to know, which vividly illustrates proper Jewish sexuality involves both the heart and the mind, not merely the body. And so when he says marital duty and your body's not your own, he's not just talking about the physical action of sex. He's talking about the heart and the mind of the person, of fulfilling your marital duty towards fulfilling their heart and mind, not just fulfilling sexual needs. And so you have to change and shift this concept that sex involves all three: your heart, your mind, and the physical piece. And that was one of the huge dramatic shifts. I was like, why aren't we teaching this more in the church? This isn't just a intimate physical exchange. This is about really knowing the person.
Yeah, and the way this shows up in the Bible sometimes is there are plenty of... Okay, so to know is not just a euphemism for sex in the Bible. There are plenty of places that the author could have written to know, and they don't. They'll use a little bit more plain language. But when it is written to know, like in other words, Adam knew his wife, that is what this is talking about. The not just the physical, but also the mental. And he knows all
heart.
About her.
He knew her mind.
Yes, yeah. Yes. You know the whole person, not just a euphemism for sex.
Right. And so then we go on and continue to understand that these are the teachings that the men would have been taught about sex. So back then, marriage was very contractual, okay? Mm-hmm. They actually had the equivalent of what was like a prenup in our days of, here's your role in the marriage, here's my role in the marriage. Part of the man's role was to provide for her physically in the sense of providing her food, providing her clothing, providing her shelter, and this is what they would have been taught about sex. And this is what I personally found mind-blowing, because I'm like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. Sex is considered a woman's right, not a man's. The husband is to ensure that all forms of sexual touch are pleasurable for her. And so this goes into a lot more. I mean, you want to read something fascinating, like go read all the Jewish laws and what the Jews believe. But one of the things that they had was what was called niddah, Niddah. It was how they handled a woman when she was menstruating. And basically, they weren't allowed to touch each other or have sex while she was on her period, and she had to go through a 7-day cleansing period afterwards where they couldn't be together either. So there was almost a 2-week period where women were not obligated to engage in sex or any physical touch. But the men knew and the women knew this was the time to emotionally engage and to spiritually engage and to be mindful of building that connection. And the whole purpose was to build the anticipation up and to get so desirous of each other that when the time of purification was over, then we can go into having the physical part until the next menstrual cycle. And so this was the husband's understanding of, let me connect with you, let me care for you, let me love you, while we're in this time of not being able to, by law, have sex.
Right.
Sex for selfish personal satisfaction without regard for the partner's pleasure is wrong and considered evil. And sexual touch and intercourse are to be celebrated in joy and not in sadness, anger, disinterest, when drunk, or self-interest. So when Paul wrote 1 Corinthians 13, backing up, you don't have authority over your body. This is his starting point of what he understands and understood about sex. And so I think a lot of people read that in the English and we just understand it from a very American perspective, but you got to realize the cultural perspective that Paul started from and his understanding of why he would write it the way he did. Mm-hmm. So moving on, there are 4 musts to having an amazing sex life. First, you got to be cultivating, be responsive, be communicative, and be complimentary. And where did we get these from?
Song of Solomon.
Song of Solomon.
So, Song of Solomon 5:1. This is, the lovers talking to each other a lot. And this first one is the man talking to his lover. I have come into my garden, my sister, my bride. I have gathered my myrrh with my spice. I have eaten my honeycomb and my honey. I have drunk my wine and my milk. Now, the first thing to note there, besides all of the innuendo and euphemisms, is you cannot come into a garden and start eating of the fruit unless that garden has been cultivated. Yeah. This garden that he's coming into, this passage presupposes that there's been some gardening happening, some planting, some care, some special attention paid to it in order to be able to yield what he's now enjoying.
Correct. And so the next one, and listen, my lover is knocking. Open to me, my sister, my darling, my dove, my flawless one. I arose to open for my lover, and my hands dripped with myrrh. Again, if we're going back to 4 musts for an amazing sex life. First one was to be cultivating. The next 2 is be responsive and be communicative. And then the last one?
Well, if you guys take the time to go and read this passage, the 5:2 and 5, you'll notice they don't actually come together at this point. This is a little bit more of that cultivating, but it's almost kind of like cat and mouse. He's building anticipation.
Mm-hmm. He's flirting with her.
Uh-huh, yeah. Not,
he's being flirty.
Yeah, not going all the way there. And then she's like, I've opened the door, and then he's not there. And so she has to go out looking for him. And then the last one, my lover is radiant and ruddy. outstanding among 10,000. Now, this is the woman talking about her man.
So-
She's being very complimentary, and she's saying this to all the other women in the village.
So I read somewhere, I was listening to some podcasts on Song of Solomon just to try to understand it better, and somebody said 25% of the time the man is talking, 75% of the time the woman and her girlfriends are talking, and I'm like, accurate. Absolutely accurate. So what do we need to do? Like he said, before you can go and gather from a garden, you first got to cultivate it. So let's talk about obstacles to cultivation. And let's talk about one of the biggest obstacles to sex, having a good sex life, is what we call the obligation sex message. This is the idea that, and especially in the church, where women think, oh, my body's not my own. I have to have sex. If I don't have sex, my husband might have an affair, go have pornography,
porn.
masturbate, you know.
I'm responsible for my husband's purity.
I'm responsible for my husband's purity. And so it puts a lot of pressure and tension on the woman to feel like I have to physically show up or else I'm responsible for the fallout of X, Y, or Z. Or this idea that sex is just for the husband's pleasure and not my own. And so one of the things that I often tell women is sex was designed for both people's pleasure. Again, when God talks about sex in the Bible, he intends for it to be for the pleasure of both men and women. If you think about the anatomy of the woman, the clitoris only serves one purpose and one purpose only, and that's for sexual pleasure. I often tell women, I'm like, why would God give us a pleasure button if he didn't intend for sex to be pleasurable? And so part of it is to have this idea that sex isn't just for a man and his pleasure, but it's meant for a woman and her pleasure as well. And oftentimes when I ask women, what are your sexual needs? She'll just look at me and go, I don't know. And I'm like, what do you mean you don't know? I'm like, you don't have any sexual needs, any desire of your own to have sex? You don't have any kind of sexual fantasies you would like to fulfill with your spouse? And they're like, I don't know. I've never thought about it. Nobody's ever asked. And so that's one of the things I want you guys to start thinking about. Husbands, think about for your wives, and wives, think about for yourselves. What are your own sexual needs? Because part of that is taking ownership over your sex life. If you're going to have a kick in sex life in your marriage, which I fully believe God intends for our sex life to be great, not just mediocre, you know, what are some of your sexual needs that you want met and fulfilled, and take ownership over that of figuring out, how can I ask for these and get these met in a healthy way, you know? And stop viewing sex as a task. You know, one of the things I really encourage a lot of women to think about is stop viewing it as something that is another thing to do on your checklist. Sex is not a checklist thing. It should be, again, the idea is to build the emotional and the mental and the spiritual intimacy that leads to the desire to have sex. And we'll talk about the guy's role in helping build the emotional, because, guys, a lot of times you guys miss the mark in building the emotional and the mental, and you just want to go get the sexual fulfilled, and your wife is left completely empty. And if she's empty, she's going to feel like, I can't meet you here because I've got nothing to give. And so it really is finding that balance of, how do I properly show up for my wife mentally and emotionally, and connect with her and cultivate this bond of trust and love and care with her, so we can have an awesome sex life.
Yeah.
And another thing I often tell wives too is understand he desires to connect with you. One of the guy's biggest ways to have a connection with their wife is through sex. You know, one of the most connecting times for men is, there's 2 times that men feel most wanted and connected: upon coming home from work and how they are greeted, and then right after you have sex, those 10 seconds after sex, what you say to him. You know, that is the most connecting time a man will feel. And usually after a man can have sex and he gets his short little nap in, then you'll find that he can be a little more emotionally connecting. But you just don't want to use sex as an avenue for emotional connecting, guys. You have to be able to understand that, you got to emotionally connect. And emotional connection is the end in and of itself. It's not just to get to the goal of sex. How does this affect men?
So with men, you have to be, we're just going to read the slide, but being the leader and taking ownership for your part is a very difficult thing to do sometimes. But if you can, it really, oh goodness, the value of that is almost immeasurable.
What does it mean to be a leader in a marriage?
I would say to be the leader is to be the decision maker, but also to be, not the decision maker, but to the words are escaping me right now, but
I think of the verse of husbands, die to yourself. Like everybody knows the verse, wives, submit to your husbands. But what comes after that is a harder command for the husbands than the wives. We just have to submit. They were called to die.
It's both submission. It's like when I want to say leader, it's not going to find a better model than what Christ showed. And what did he say? He said to his disciples that when they were arguing about who's going to be the greatest in God's kingdom, he's like, you see the Romans and the people around you and how those in authority lord it over them. He's like, it's not that way. It should not be that way with you. He goes, even the Son of Man came to what? To serve, not to be served. Right? And in the Bible, when it talks about, Paul stood a lot of things on their heads, for his day, for husbands to submit to wives and vice versa. Like, oh yeah, we all know wives should submit to husbands, and a lot of times the husbands will lord that over. But it also says husbands also submit to your wives. The Bible talks about what Jesus came to do is to bring the high places low and fill the valleys. He's basically leveling the playing field. He's like, there is no more, rich and poor in God's kingdom, slave and owner in God's kingdom. You're all equal at the foot of the cross. And in marriage, if you want true leadership to play out in your marriage, the way Paul talks about it with the Trinity, where, yes, Jesus submitted to God the Father. And, so he trickles that down. He said, Jesus is the head of the church, and husband is the head of the home. And you submit to each other, but then, like you said, he gave the husbands the harder task of dying. How many people want to die? I don't.
And again, I don't think he means obviously a physical death,
right,
but it's dying to some of your selfishness, dying to some of your desires. It's like, let's get real. We're all tired in this day and age. Most of us work full-time jobs. Like, very few people have the luxury of staying at home and raising their babies. And if you do, that's a full-time job and 2 full-time jobs, because it doesn't ever stop, And it's non-going. Again, going back to that tabs, you have to constantly switch tabs over and over and over and over again. And every time you switch tab, your energy level gets drained and drained and drained. And so when you're a leader and you're called to die to yourself, you're called to come home and ask, instead of sitting there thinking like, oh, I'm so tired, I just need to rest, and putting everything on your wife, showing up for her and going, hey, what do I need to do for you right now? How can I serve you? How can I love you best? What can I do for the family in this hour to get us on the same page to where we need to be?
Yeah, and I think, to going back to what does it mean to be the head of something, that means it's not going to be fair. If you're the one that's you're the one that's called to die. It's like, let that marinate for just a second. In marriage, we're called to submit to each other. We're called to meet each other's needs, for sure, 100%. Men, you have needs that matter. And hopefully, your wife is paying attention to that. But at the end of the day, Jesus died for people that rejected him. You're called to be like Jesus.
Right. And I want to touch on what you said of it's not fair. It made me think of, being the director at my counseling center. There's a lot of extra things I have to do. I have to sign off on all the supervision notes. I have to do all the supervision. I have to stay on site, even if I don't have a client to see, because the registered interns have to have a licensed person on site. And there's so many extra things that I have to do that I could very easily go, oh, this is so not fair. But being in that leadership position, that's just my job.
Yeah.
That's just my job. I'm not going to sit here and complain about what has been called to my job and are the requirements of my job, because if I didn't show up for my job, there wouldn't be a counseling center. Just like husbands, if you don't show up for your marriage, you're not going to have much of a marriage. And I can't emphasize this enough. Like, guys, one of my biggest prayers for men nowadays is to wake up. Statistically, if a man goes to church and brings his family, he has an 85% chance of getting his whole family saved. If a woman goes to church and brings her family, it's about 40 to 50%. And if the kids do, it's about 25%. Men, you have such a large impact on your family. It's time to wake up. So own your defensiveness. This is one of the biggest problems that I think people in marriage have, but we're going to hone in on men, because what the typical thing happens is she comes and she's like, the house isn't clean, this isn't right, da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da, and she just starts going down her overwhelmed, overstimulated list of how she feels. And the husband will do?
Yeah, but I cleaned this yesterday and I vacuumed that, and he's going to start hitting you with everything that actually did, from a logical brain standpoint. Yeah, but I did this and this and that, and you're not seeing da-da-da-da-da.
Correct. And she's going to go, boom, because that's not what she's trying to tell you right now. What she's speaking to you is out of her being overstimulated and overwhelmed, feeling left alone, and there's too much on my plate. That's what she's not saying, And so part of connecting with her emotionally, again, if sex is an emotional, mental, spiritual, and physical connection, part of connecting with your wife emotionally is owning your defensiveness, dropping the defense, get rid of what you actually did, and hear the heart, hear the emotion behind what she's actually saying. I think Joe said it once in one of the other talks we did. He goes, we like to shoot the problem out of this guy. He goes, keep your gun, change your ammo. He goes, shoot the emotion out of this guy, play the emotional guessing game. I see overstimulated and overwhelmed for 500, Bob, and figure out what emotion, even though it feels like criticism, what emotion behind the criticism are you actually hearing, and hit her on the emotional level. I promise you she'll get all ooey gooey and it'll diffuse the situation in 3 seconds. And build trust by demonstrating that your wife's emotional needs are just as important. Again, if a wife feels like she is emotionally taken care of and seen, like one of my favorite stories in the Bible is actually when Abraham got Hagar pregnant and Sarah was being abusive to her and she ran off into the desert, and God meets her there, and she's the first person to give God a name, and it was the God who sees me. And that hit me so hard when I read that. I was like, the God who sees me, because he saw her needs, he saw her heart, he saw her emotions, he saw everything about her. And that's what wives want from the husbands. Build the trust in her that you see her, you get her, you know her. Moving on. Okay. So the next thing that we need to do in cultivating an awesome sex life, and again, these are the obstacles that come around, is what we call the orgasm gap between men and women. This is one reason why the obligation sex message can feel like it's all about men. 98% of men orgasm consistently, where only 50% of women orgasm on a consistent basis. And so when you've got such a large gap, no wonder that it feels so task-oriented if the women aren't getting any pleasure out of it. There's that part of them that's just like, why do I want to do this? I mean, imagine this. Your wife's having sex, she has an orgasm, and before you can ejaculate, she just gets up and leaves. And if she did this every single time and that's all she ever required of you, how boring would sex be and how frustrated would you be after a while? Be pretty frustrated, you know? And so this is where when you engage both people and make sex enjoyable and fun for both people, then it's going to increase the sex life, and you're going to want to engage in sex more often. You know, the average time for orgasm for men is 5 to 7 minutes, and for women, 14 to 20. So we've got a little bit of a gap going on. There are ways, men, to...
Well, that's an opportunity.
Yeah, opportunity for what?
Pay attention to her.
Pay attention to her. Yeah, opportunity to see what she likes, what she doesn't like. How does she like to be touched? What kind of pressure does she like? It's an opportunity also, if you guys are trying to increase the guy's longevity, you're going to have to go slow and pause every few seconds, have the guy do a Kegel in order to calm himself down a little bit, in order to train his body to last a little bit longer. So there are ways to increase, men, how long it takes you to get to orgasm. Really encourage you to Google and educate yourself on some articles, listen to some healthy podcasts about how to do this, because when you make the sex pleasurable for women, more than likely they're going to want to engage more frequently. Now, ironically enough, for the 30 to 40 age group, I think sex on average only happens about 65 days out of the year. So you got to think it's almost about once a week, sometimes twice a week on average. So if you think that this idea of, oh, I need sex every day, twice a day, that's actually abnormal. Like, very rarely do I get men that have that high of a sex drive. Most men are okay with a frequency of every 2 to 3 days. And statistically, women actually have just as high of a sex drive as men. We're more affected by stress. So as soon as stress hits us, sex goes right out the window. And so you want to engage as much of the sex life as possible, make it more pleasurable for her. 25% of women, this is another misconception, 25% of women can orgasm with just sex alone. And what I mean by that is penis and vagina, of coitus, what they call just straight up sex. Most women need clitoral stimulation in order to have sex and make it pleasurable. And so, again, find out, and this is one of the things we're going to talk about, is figuring out what are you guys' likes and dislikes tomorrow if you're going to be joining us for our breakout session tomorrow, because you got to figure out your own body and what is it that you like. And what I tell a lot of women, too, is you actually have to train your body to orgasm. It just doesn't happen as natural as a guy does. And so you do have to take the time to figure out your own body as well. So other obstacles to cultivating a good sex life. Again, these are things that you have to work through and get over. And one of them is the messages that are taught about sex. You know, I can't tell you how many women I've had to work with and do some trauma therapy over because they were taught sex is bad, good girls don't do that, and they're taught this their whole entire life, and then all of a sudden they get married and it's like green light, go. You don't erase that messaging very easily. And so there is certain things you have to look at and challenge in yourself of going, what are the messages I was taught about sex? You know, and I don't want to do that again. This usually involves a person's first sexual experience. I've had to do multiple trauma sessions with usually my female clients who've had very traumatic sexual experiences their first time, and it's put a bad taste in their mouth about sex from that point forward. Now, whether it was on their wedding night or whether it was prior to their wedding night, it doesn't matter. You know, if your first sexual experiences wasn't that great, you're not going, it sets your brain up neurologically to be wired to think this thing isn't going to be fun. And then this idea of attaboy, way to go, guys, is, you know, men sowing their wild oats and, you know, being highly sexual beings. It sets you guys up of not understanding that God's asking you to control your own sexuality and control your sex life. Mm-hmm. Got anything to say about that?
Not really. It's just, you know, when it comes to the context of you know, someone who's not married yet, I just felt like I should say this. For those who may be thinking, oh, I have to have sex X amount of times per week, otherwise I'm just, you know, I'll get cranky, or I'll get you don't understand how high my drive is. What about before you were married? As a child of God, as a man of God, you're called to be pure in your life before marriage. What if your wife were to die? Heaven forbid. Like, where do we? I think that's an excuse. I think men typically take that as an excuse and start to put undue pressure on their wives when it comes to that. But we are called to have a spirit of self-control. That's one of the fruits of the Spirit.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So again, continuing to bust through the obstacles prior to cultivation is trauma and healing from sexual abuse. So 1 out of 4 women are sexually abused prior to the age of 18. And that's just the ones that are reported. They think statistically it's closer to 50%. They say 1 out of 5 men are sexually abused as well. And I'll be the first to tell you it's the best kept secret of men. So I've had a guy client I worked with for probably since the beginning of my career. It took him 8 years to tell me he was finally sexually abused as a boy. Because it is taboo for a man to discuss their own sexual abuse history. And so if there is sexual trauma, please, 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 you don't have to carry that weight by yourself. There is healing. God wants you healed and whole. You know, and again, these are some of the barriers that can impede a healthy sexual life in your marriage. Health issues, vaginismus and sexual pain. Really great book. I'm blanking on it now.
The Great Sex
Rescue. The Great Sex Rescue, thank you, by Sheila Greger. Awesome book. She did a huge study of what was it, 20,000 women?
Oh goodness, yeah, it was a proper statistical analysis, not just we surveyed 50 couples, no, you know, on the street. No,
her sister-in-law is a statistician, so yes. Like legit went to school to be a statistician. Like this is a amazing study and
very
the book.
Thorough questionnaire with
correct,
you know, proper control questions built in.
Correct,
and, you know.
And one of the things that they found is that in Christian marriages, vaginismus or sexual pain is 30% higher than in secular marriages. And they suspect and correlate it back to feeling of obligation and the have to and the stress and the pressure of needing to feel like you have to perform. And so one of the things that if you are dealing with sexual pain and vaginismus, first go to your doctor, find out what is going on. It could be a hormonal issue. It could be a nerve issue. I've had plenty of clients who actually end up having too much vascular blood flow to their uterus, and that's part of why they experience a lot of sexual pain. It could be, especially this happens a lot after childbirth. Something just doesn't heal right. It could be scar tissue if you had an episiotomy or a C-section. Like your body went through a very physical stress at that point in time, and it needs time to heal. Erectile dysfunction disorder, again, in order to move through the obstacles, this is very common in men, usually an indication that there is lower testosterone. So if you are experiencing this, either high stress or low testosterone, again, seek medical attention and go to your doctor and talk about it. There is no shame, especially as men age. This is going to become a little more common. It could be an enlarged prostate, or it could be indication of some other issue. Pregnancy and postpartum and hormone issues. They're now doing studies that pregnancy hormones, I read them once, it said 2 to 3 years postpartum to fully get out of your body. Now they're saying it's 8 to 10 years before a woman's body is back to baseline. I absolutely believe that. If you think about the amount of anxiety, about the amount of depression that women go under, and then you have multiple kids on top of that, it's going to take her body, her mind, her brain, hormonally and physically, to get back to a normal baseline. And this is where I would encourage most women, please work with your doctor or a healthcare professional, somebody you trust and know, to help work getting your body back to healthy. You deserve it for yourself. It's not just to increase your sex life, it's because you deserve to feel good. All right, moving on, being responsive. So when we talk about responsive, we're, again, sex is this emotional, mental, physical act. We're going to be trying to talk about all three. So when you're being responsive, you got to understand the current needs of the season. Oftentimes I'll hear in couple session, but that's not what we agreed to prior to marriage. It's like, I get that, but could you anticipate half of the issues that you had? Did you anticipate that your kids would act like that? Did you anticipate that you would lose your job? Did you anticipate that this financial thing would happen? Did you anticipate that this would go on? It's just like you have to be willing to look at life in chunks and seasons and basically have business meetings for that current season. What is meaningful and practical for us during the season of life? We're getting to this season. I've got about 5 more years, and then we're hitting empty nest syndrome. My youngest is going to be 13 this year, and there's a part of me that's like, yes. There's a part of me that's like, no. But it's going to be a totally different season of life, because right now our life runs around a lot of what our kids do. What then? Like, I'm going to look at him and be like, hi, who are you? And we're going to have to re-talk about what do we want during that season of life. What I needed from him during when the kids were small and I stayed at home with them the majority of the time is going to be very different than what I need now, going to be very different than what I need 5 years from now. And likewise, what he needed from me when the kids were super small is different than what he needs now, and is going to be different when they leave the coop. So you guys have to be willing to respond to your guys' needs based on the season of life you're in. Have some marriage business meetings. And what I mean by that is sit down and establish.
Are you on the same?
What? Oh, is it not the? Oh, sorry. I'm hitting buttons. Oh, I skipped one. We'll go back. Sorry, guys. I was wondering why everybody was looking at it like so funny. So marriage business meetings, one of the things that I really encourage people to do is to, just like you would in any business, sit down and have a business meeting about what you want that season of your life to look like. Create a standard of care. What I mean by a standard of care is just like if you had an employee and you hired them to come and clean your office for you, what would your expectations be? Here's what I need. And you would list it out. So create standards of care of what your expectations are for certain things. Like if, you want the dishes done, here's how I want them done. When we first got married, bless his heart, Joe's idea of doing the kitchen was just putting the dishes in the dishwasher. Nothing else. And now he's really good about doing the whole thing. But we've had to sit here and work through and talk about what that standard looks like. And the standard of care and also conceptualization, planning, and execution also involves, goes along with the idea of the mental load, because in decision fatigue, conceptualization and planning is some of the harder parts of figuring life out. The execution part just means hit the go button. That does take energy, but there's a lot of people who can execute. Not everybody conceptualize and plan. So you got to decide who is going to do all three of them at the same time. So make sexual resolutions each quarter. You want to talk about that one?
No.
Why?
It's just basically getting on the same page, communicating very clear. This goes back to Boaz, communicating very clearly what your expectations are. That's why it's called Sexpectations. But it's not wrong to be open and upfront and have a game plan. And just to be honest about, hey, during this season of my life, I feel like I kind of need some of this. Mm-hmm. And I'm picking up that you're kind of needed some of that. And
so in making the resolutions, I tell people make them per quarter and sit down and talk about at the end of each quarter what happened if we weren't able to meet the resolutions. Problem solve it, because when you sit down and sit there and instead of getting hurt of thinking, I wasn't a priority, my needs weren't met, I didn't get my emotional needs, but then you sit and look and go, oh man, we just spent 5 weeks going through some kind of an illness. There was one time we had 8 rounds of strep throat go through our house and it took us 2 months to get rid of it. That's tiring. Mm-hmm. That is really tiring. That's going to put a damper on things. Not his fault, not my fault, but it's not going to allow for room to cultivate an intimacy well because you're busy taking care of chronically sick kids all the time.
Right, and if you sit down and agree to it up front, something that you can both, it's achievable, it's, the SMART, specific, measurable, attainable, all that stuff. If you sit down afterwards and you say, okay, what were the obstacles? What prevented us from hitting these goals?
Right.
Then you can, the devil loves to put assumptions in your mind. I bet they did that on purpose. When they said they were going to do that, and if you never talk about it after the fact, that's like the devil's playground to say, oh yeah, they said they loved you, but
right. So
did they really follow through?
So when you're making the sexual resolutions, again, get specific. What kind of positions would you like to try? What kind of places would you like to try? What kind of toys or fantasy play? And when you're doing fantasy play, keep it specific to each other. It is not fantasy play if you guys are thinking about somebody else.
Right. That's
sin.
Yeah. The bottom line is
Christ called it out. He's like, if you have lust in your heart for another woman, you commit adultery. Yeah. And so keep it specific to each other. And again, agreed upon. I think this is one of the things that Christians don't talk enough about is it's okay to have an amazing sex life if you both agree to it. Talk about it and don't try to coerce your partner into it. Be curious as to why they may not want to do something. Engage them in a conversation of, hey, tell me what is your hang up. I had one client one time who came to me and she's like, I don't want to have sex with my partner. And I said, okay. I go, what's going on? And then when we got to the bottom of it, what happened was she was sexually abused by her own dad growing up, and her partner used the same mouthwash that her dad used, and it would trigger her every single time. And so I said, why don't you just ask him to switch his mouthwash? You know? And so as soon as she was able to communicate that, they were able to move forward in their sex life. And so you got to be curious. Take a curious stance. Help me to understand what might be the hang up here. And not in a way that will, try to push them and bully them into agreeing to what you want them to do.
Genuine curiosity.
Genuine curiosity. Yeah. Absolutely.
And it also is a very vulnerable time. Like, men are a lot more emotional about sex than society gives us credit for, because our identity is so much wrapped up in our sexual identity, like who I am as a man. Like, am I really a man? All this kind of stuff plays into. You okay?
Yeah, I am. I'm trying to get to the next slide. Figure out where.
But
went ahead.
That's a really. We talked about common traps earlier. Like, watch out. That's gonna be a potential sensitive area to talk about. So you have to approach each other with patience and love and respect. And when it comes to like, yeah, I have this desire, I have this goal. If you're not careful and gentle about how you respond, that could come across feeling like big time rejection. If so just be careful when it comes to that conversation.
So we're going back a little bit. I didn't realize I skipped a slide, guys. Sorry about that. So in cultivating your sex life, you're going to want to use chemistry to your advantage. So oxytocin and dopamine are really crucial chemicals in your body. They help bind you together. So when a woman gives birth to a baby, she produces an amazing amount of oxytocin, and it creates an instant connection of bonding and wanting you to take care of that baby. When you're looking somebody in the eyes, when you're cooking together, when you're laughing together, when you're hanging out with friends together, all of that is producing oxytocin. So you're going to want a well-cultivated life, not just come home, eat dinner in silence or eat dinner separate and watch TV for the evening. You're not using oxytocin to your advantage. And so when she's sitting there going, oh, come out with me or take me dancing, take her dancing. Go take her dancing. Get some oxytocin flowing. Again, date your spouse and figure out what dating looks like. It doesn't have to be expensive. And I think that is the biggest misconception that a lot of people think of. I got to take her to an expensive dinner. Find out what's meaningful to her. Pray and do a Bible study together. Eliminate distractions when you're talking to each other. Gottman, he's one of the world-renowned marriage and family therapists. He actually has a Gottman Institute. I think it's up in Oregon. And he found that if you just do these simple few things, it actually exponentially increases the well-being of your marriage. So kiss each other upon waking and before you leave. Ask each other, what do you want me to think about, pray about, or follow up with you on today? Actually follow up with them at some point during the day. Make contact with them during the day. Greet each other with a kiss when you get home, and then take about 20 minutes to have some decompression time to talk about, hey, how did that thing go? How was your presentation? How was the deal go down? And just create that connection. So again, if we're cultivating a sex life, these are all things that go into cultivating a good sex life.
And can you back up there?
Where? There?
Right there, yeah. Greeting each other with a kiss upon arriving, home. One of the things that my pastor at our church has said, and it stuck out to me, he's mentioned it a couple times, how he would come home and he would walk in the door, and there's the dogs, and the dogs would come up, and he'd, oh, hey, how you doing, little puppies? And then the kids would come running down the stairs, and he'd, hey, how are you doing, girls? And after a few months of that, his wife, Raina, said, it would be nice if you would greet me before you greet the dog. Mm. And this is going back, like making each other a priority.
Being
When
intentional.
put it on the forefront of your mind. As soon as you walk through the door, as soon as I walk through the door, I'm looking for her, even though the dogs and the kids come running up to me. And it's okay for them to know who the priority is.
Right. Absolutely. All right. Yes. Okay. So we're doing okay-ish on time. We got to run through this quickly. All right. So when you're cultivating your sex life, you want to communicate your emotions, thoughts, and feelings, and watch the tone of your voice and your body language. 85% of communication is your body language, voice inflection, tone of voice, and intonation, how you say something. The actual 15% is the words that come out of your mouth. So you can look at somebody and be like, I love you. Or you can look at them and be like, I love you. You know? Same 3 words, 2 totally different meanings. Best time to discuss sex. You guys have to talk about your sex life. I think this is a totally underrated thing that people don't do enough of, is talk about sex. Not during, obviously. Probably not right before you're planning on, and probably not right after. But usually the next morning, make sure you guys are well fed. Make sure you sit down and make sure you're intentional about talking about your sex life, but talk about it. Like, how often do you guys not talk about it and you just get frustrated and you end up arguing about it versus actually talking about it, and be curious about what the other person wants? You know, take time to explore each other's bodies. One of the things I tell clients is take turns. One day's the husband, the next day's the wife. And I go, it doesn't have to end in sex, but start at the head, work your way all the way down to your toes. Kiss, suck, lick, touch, pressure, everything from every point, and give feedback in real time. Oh, I like that. I don't like that. That feels good. That doesn't feel good. Like, don't do that ever again, you know? And find out what your spouse actually likes. You know, figure out where their erogenous zones are, you know, the back of the knees, the elbows, and find out what they enjoy and how they enjoy being touched. Discuss why you want to try it, if you want to try something new. Sometimes the why is really important, because I think, again, a lot of times people assume, well, where did you hear that from? Or who did you try that with? You know? Figure out the why. Be curious. Why is your spouse asking you for something? And figure out what is the actual need. You know? And the why could be a bunch of different things. They want to experience it with you. They want a playmate. They just want some variety. There's a lot of reasons why people want to try different things. Discuss frequency. Things to discuss. Discuss the frequency of how frequent would each of you like to have sex. And again, if it's pleasurable for her, chances are she's going to want to have sex more often. And safety and security concerns. And what I mean by that is, if one of you guys want to try to have sex, say like on the kitchen table or whatever, but there's a big old window that doesn't have blinds right there, you know, that's going to be a little bit of a concern for her. You're going to have to find a way of going, okay, how can we build some privacy into this for her to make her feel safe? So, and sometimes the thing that makes a spouse say no to something is the fact that it feels safe, or there's an insecurity there. And again, instead of feeling rejected and getting defensive that you feel the rejection, be curious as to why. Let's see. And when you're complimenting your spouse, be specific, which means you're going to have to be observant. You know? You just don't sit there and say, high five, that was great. I had, oh my goodness. No, I have to laugh. I had a client, she was 16 years old, and, you know, her mom gave her permission to have sex, and her boyfriend went ahead and did the deed. And she said, yeah, it was after our 5th try. We actually gave each other a high five because it was finally good. And I had to sit and giggle, because I was just like, can you imagine high-fiving your spouse? Good job, honey. 2 enthusiastic thumbs up. You know, But be complimentary as to what did you like, what didn't you like, and encourage them to do more of something if you did like something. Be genuine. Look them in the eye.
And going back real quick, find something other than looks to be complimentary about. This goes back to that to know. To know is more, it's not just a euphemism for the physical part.
Right.
If you want to know, then you have, remember, that's the whole person. So be complimentary about the whole person. Right. That I wanted to go back to that real quick before we move on. Yeah. But yeah, being genuine. Women are the most intuitive, can tell when you're not being fully honest with them creatures on earth. If you have an ounce of selfishness or just lack of genuineness in what you're about to say, she's going to pick it up. Mm-hmm. So, I know some of the things that I've done in our marriage is like it's unintentional on my part. I'm like, oh yeah, I'm doing this because I think you want it, not because I genuinely wanted. Like it wasn't my idea in the moment. It's like I'm doing it to appease. That's not gonna fly, and.
Yeah, doing something to appease versus doing something to care for, two totally different attitudes. And trust me when I say your spouse can tell.
Yeah.
They know when you're just doing something to just shut them up and blow them off and do the checklist. Like, well, I vacuumed, I did what you want. Versus, I want to take the stress off of you. Let me care for you in this way. Mm-hmm. Big difference in attitude. Big difference in attitude. And so that kind of goes into don't give to get. When you are caring for your spouse, don't sit there and think of, oh, what are they going to do for me?
That's a big killer.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's the same thing. I've ran across a few women like this, where they use sex as a manipulation tool of, oh, if you buy me this, I'll have sex with you. If you do this for me, I'll have sex with you. If you do it. No, don't give to get. Like, have sex with your husband because you genuinely want a connection with him and you want to enjoy yourself and enjoy yourself as a couple. Like, don't make it something to where he has to earn sex, And same thing, husbands, if you're going to care for your spouse, genuinely show up and care for her emotionally. Not thinking like, oh, I'm going to get points and I'm going to get laid later. So, and be appropriate. And what I mean by this is, again, this kind of goes back to, finding out what your spouse likes. One of the biggest complaints I hear from women is, my husband acts like a 12-year-old boy in the bedroom. Some of the stuff that he says, some of the ways that he touches me, how do I stop him? I want to have sex with a man. I don't want to have sex with a 12-year-old boy, And so I have to coach the husbands on, hey, you may not be wanting to say that at that point in time. That's a huge turnoff, And so if you're going to speak up and talk to your spouse, even though, you think she looks sexy, there's a way to tell your wife she looks sexy and hot without making yourself appear and come across as if you're a 12-year-old boy trying to tell your spouse she's sexy and hot, So be appropriate. So I hope you guys got out of this that really to have a really good sex life is to cultivate the emotional, the mental, and the physical all together. If you guys do have any questions, feel free to... Oh, there we go. Text the number. I would love to answer all of your questions. So, one of my favorite subjects to talk about in counseling. So, and please, nothing's off the table. Like, don't be. Is it anonymous? It's anonymous, so that's even better. So, if you got questions later tonight, feel free to let them fly.
Is this on? Oh. I know you all are tired. Stay with me less than 5 minutes, okay? Just reminders for tomorrow. Do what you did today. Hilda, do better though, okay? Be on time. I loved it. We're going to be... you can get here as early as you like, whether the doors are open. That's debatable. But childcare, they can't take your kiddos before 8:40, but you're welcome to come early because we will have continental breakfast. We'll have coffee, yummies here. So rush, leave your home because there's food here, okay? I love that Angie and Joe went over dating your spouse because that is the whole point of lunch tomorrow. It's going to be very intentional time. We are too busy, guys, so you can't give me an excuse that you can't date your spouse because guess what? I'm making you. So with that, there are logistics, okay? So we're having 4 Rivers. Thank Kim Johnston, because I was going to feed you Chick-fil-A, but she was like, the men will love 4 Rivers. And I was like, okay, that makes sense. If you hate that, you can bring your own food, okay? We do not want you guys leaving the campus because it's time. You're taking away from time you can have with your partner. So the idea is going to be you can scatter all around the campus except the baseball fields and the sanctuary. So if you don't like sitting on the floor, please bring a blanket or chairs. You can go wherever. If it's open, you can go. If the door's unlocked, you can go. I will be repeating this tomorrow when you're bright-eyed and bushy-tailed and you're more receptive, okay? Actually, that's it. Your folders, very important. There's handouts for your breakouts tomorrow and more notes for Angie's talk in the morning. If you are the type to forget it at home, leave it here. No one's going to be here, okay? Just leave it on the table or we can round them all up here. Otherwise, take them home, but don't forget them because that's on you, okay? If you have children, please go get them. But thank you guys so much. Thank you, Angie and Joe. I will see you bright in the morning, on time.